They said I was just a poor roofer. I didn't argue. I just sat there while the lawyer read the will and handed me everything my brother built. My name is Carter, and if you ask my kids who I am, they'd probably shrug and say, just a roofer. Not a father. Not a man who gave up his own dreams so they could chase theirs. Just a man who smells like tar and comes home with cracked hands. I've spent my life on ladders, patching holes that nobody sees until the rain comes. And somehow, that's become a metaphor for everything. I fix things before they fall apart, quietly, without applause. But the older I get, the more I realize, maybe people only respect what makes noise. It wasn't always like this. When their mother was alive, our home felt whole. She had a way of making Sunday dinners sacred, of reminding them that love didn't need to shine. It just had to be steady. But after the cancer took her, the warmth faded. The kids were teenagers then, already learning to measure worth by titles and paychecks. I kept working, paid the bills, cooked what I could. I wasn't trying to replace her. I just didn't want them to feel the silence. But silence, it turns out, can be louder than anything. They grew up and left home in a hurry. I didn't blame them. I had nothing glamorous to offer. No vacations, no inheritance, no stocks or startup stories. Just a steady man with a rusty toolbox and a house that held memories like dust in the corners. I called them on birthdays, sent little checks when I could. Sometimes I drive hours just to surprise them with a visit, only to hear, "Now's not a good time, Dad." So I stopped showing up, stopped calling as much, and the silence grew deeper. Then came the phone call I wasn't expecting. My brother Henry had passed away. Heart attack, they said. Sudden, clean, just like him, always neat, always organized, always miles ahead of me in everything. He was the polished one, the success story, ran a chain of hardware stores, wore iron shirts, played golf with people who talked about markets and mergers. We hadn't spoken much in the last decade. Not out of anger, just life drifting in different directions. Still, I felt it in my chest. That ache you can't explain. Because even if time separates brothers, grief doesn't ask for permission. The funeral was scheduled for a Friday. Small town service, in the chapel where we once sang hymns as boys. I debated going. Figured I'd sit in the back, say a prayer, and leave without stirring the dust. But something in me said go. Maybe guilt. Maybe longing. Maybe I just didn't want the last memory of him to be silenced, too. When I arrived, the parking lot was full of expensive cars. I recognized none of them. My kids were already there, wearing black, standing tall next to people who looked like they belonged in magazines. They didn't see me at first, and when they did, I got polite nods. Not hugs. Not "Dad, you okay?" Just the kind of acknowledgement you give to someone you once knew but no longer fit into your story. The service was respectful. Speeches about legacy, hard work, business acumen. No mention of the boy who used to steal apples with me from Mrs. Langley's tree. No laughter about how Henry once cried because a girl named Beth broke his glasses. That version of him had been erased, polished away by board meetings and brand identity. I sat there, hands folded, listening to the version of my brother that the world accepted. But the one I remembered. He used to climb trees barefoot and believe ketchup counted as a vegetable. After the service, a man in a Navy suit announced there'd be a reading of the will in a private room down the hall. I didn't plan to stay. Why would I? I had no stake in anything. But something, curiosity, maybe, kept me rooted to the floor. So I followed, quietly, sat near the back, just like I'd done my whole life. The room smelled like old books and lemon polish. The lawyer, a sharp man with silver hair and a voice like a courtroom gavel, began reading the document aloud. Names were mentioned. Distributions of assets. A condo here, some shares there. My kids leaned forward, their eyes flickering with the greed they wouldn't dare admit. And then the man paused, looked up from the page. He cleared his throat and said, "To my brother Carter." The room froze. I felt every head turn. My name, had just echoed through walls where I'd always been invisible. "To my brother Carter," the lawyer repeated, "who never asked me for anything, who lived with his back bent and his heart full. I leave everything else." Silence. And then, laughter. Disbelief. One of my sons muttered, "That's got to be a mistake." But it wasn't. The lawyer kept reading. Properties. Accounts. The hardware chain. A beach house I didn't even know he owned. All of it. To me. I sat still, my hands trembling. Not from excitement, but from confusion. Why? Why me? My eyes met the lawyer's. He gave a small nod. Your brother was very clear. He said you were the only one who never wanted anything from him, except his time. And suddenly, I remembered. Years ago, 15, maybe more, I'd visited him after Martha died. Just showed up at his shop and asked if he wanted to grab coffee. We didn't talk about money. We didn't talk about business. We just sat, two tired men, talking about old songs and stupid memories. It was the last time I saw him smile without a clock behind his eyes. That's what he remembered. Not the world he built, but the moment we shared without wanting anything in return. When the reading ended, my kids didn't say a word. One of them stormed out. The other just looked at me like I was a stranger. Maybe I was. I walked outside into the fading light, hands still shaking, head spinning. I didn't feel rich. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt seen. For the first time in years, someone had said, "You matter," and meant it. And I had no idea what I was going to do next. But I knew this. I wouldn't waste it. Not this time. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was overwhelmed by the inheritance or suddenly thinking about how to spend the money. Truth is, I didn't even know what exactly I'd inherited yet. I just kept hearing Henry's voice. Not the polished, suit-wearing man he became, but the boy I grew up with, laughing, cursing at scraped knees, daring me to jump from the top of the barn roof like we were invincible. It's strange what memory does. The moment you feel something shift in your life, the past comes rushing back, not in full stories, but in flashes. And that night, lying on a mattress that had long stopped being comfortable, I saw us as kids again, barefoot in the mud, not yet disappointed by the world. By morning, the silence in my house felt heavier than usual. I made coffee, same as always, using the old, dented kettle that whistles too soon. For a moment, I forgot about everything that had happened. Then I saw the folded letter from the lawyer on the kitchen table, and the weight of it returned. Not just the legal part, but what it meant. My brother had left me something. Everything. And I still couldn't understand why. Around 9 a.m., the first call came. My oldest son. I hadn't heard his voice in nearly a year. Not since I asked him if we could have lunch, and he said he was too slammed that week. Now, suddenly, he had time. "Hey, Dad," he said, voice warm like honey over a fresh wound. "Just wanted to check on you. Yesterday was a lot." I said nothing for a second, just listened. Let the silence stretch a little longer than comfort allowed. Then I answered, "I'm okay." He cleared his throat. You know, it was a shock for all of us. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Yeah, it was. There was a pause. Then came the question I was waiting for, wrapped in politeness. "So, what are your plans now?" With everything. Plans. As if I'd been secretly mapping out some empire, waiting for a windfall. I wanted to say I had no clue. That I was still trying to understand how a man who lived his whole life in the background suddenly found himself in the spotlight. But I didn't say that. I said, "Not sure yet." Over the next few days, the calls kept coming. My younger son, his wife, even a cousin I hadn't spoken to since Martha's funeral. Everyone wanted to check in, to reconnect, to remind me of memories I hadn't been invited to be part of in years. And I let them talk. I didn't interrupt. I didn't push back. I just listened. Because somewhere in the middle of all that sweetness, I could hear the hunger, the quiet desperation, the truth that no one was brave enough to say out loud. "We thought you were useless, and now, suddenly, you're not." They started visiting. At first, just to see how I was holding up. Then it became more frequent. They brought me food I didn't ask for, offered to help organize my accounts, asked if I needed assistance sorting through Henry's documents. One of them even offered to move in temporarily to support me emotionally through the transition. That's when I realized they weren't here for me. They were here for the fortune they assumed I didn't know how to handle. And maybe they were right. I didn't understand trusts and portfolios or how to navigate corporate meetings. But I understood people. I understood tone. I understood when affection was real and when it was stitched together with obligation and opportunity. One night, after they left, I pulled out an old box from the back of the closet. Inside were letters Henry had sent me years ago, most of them unopened. Not because I didn't care, but because reading his words always reminded me of what I hadn't become. Back then, I thought his success was a mirror I didn't want to look into. Now, I saw them differently. I opened one, and inside was something I'd completely forgotten about. It was a photo. Me and Henry, standing on the roof of the house we helped our dad build. We were 19, sunburnt, shirtless, smiling like idiots. On the back, in his handwriting, it said, "One of us took the road up, the other stayed behind. But the foundation? You built that." My throat tightened. I sat down, hands shaking, and pulled out more letters. In one of the last ones, dated just a year before he died, he wrote, "If you're reading this, then something happened." I probably didn't say it out loud, because I was always better with numbers than emotions. But I watched you, not just as a brother, but as a man, and I saw how the world treated you like you were small. But I knew that every roof you fixed, every birthday you remembered, every dinner you cooked alone after Martha passed, none of it went unnoticed. Not by me. I didn't leave you money, Carter. I left you the respect the world owed you. That night, I didn't sleep either. But for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen. I felt like someone had watched my life play out in the background, and still thought it was worthy of a front row seat. I didn't tell my kids about the letters. I didn't tell anyone. Some things, I think, are meant to stay quiet, meant to sit deep in your chest like a secret blessing. The next morning, I went into town, not to buy anything, just to walk, to think, to feel the sun on my neck and smell the sawdust from the carpenter's shop. I passed by an old building that used to be a bakery, now boarded up, forgotten, and for the first time since the funeral, I felt an idea forming. Not a plan, not yet, but maybe a purpose. The next week felt like a performance I hadn't been invited to rehearse for. My son started showing up more often, bringing small gifts, speaking in tones laced with something that was supposed to feel like warmth. But it wasn't warmth. It was theater. They played their parts well, smiling a little too wide, calling me Dad like it was a new word they were trying to pronounce naturally again. One of them brought me a fancy coffee machine, still in the box, as if that was the bridge that would span the years of distance. The other arrived with a portfolio, talking about investment opportunities, things we could build together. I didn't even know he remembered where my house was. I didn't push them away. I let them sit at my table. I listened. I nodded. I made the same black coffee I'd always made, served in the same chipped mugs, and watched them pretend this was some kind of new beginning. But deep down I knew. This wasn't reconciliation. It was positioning. They were adjusting themselves around the idea of my value. Now that the world had decided I had some. It's strange how quickly people remember you when you have something they want. And stranger still how fast they rewrite history to make themselves the heroes. They talked about memories we never shared, about how they always admired my work ethic. I almost laughed, not out of cruelty, but because I used to dream about these exact conversations. Back when I sat alone at holidays. Back when I left voicemails they never returned. Now, suddenly, they wanted to remember, just in time to inherit something they hadn't helped carry. One afternoon, I caught myself staring at the hallway mirror. I didn't recognize the man looking back. Not because I had changed, but because the way they were treating me made me feel like I had to become someone else to match their expectations. Someone savvy, strategic, someone who would turn this inheritance into an empire, with them at my side. But I didn't want an empire. I just wanted peace. I wanted honesty. I wanted to stop having to defend the life I built with my hands just because it didn't sparkle on paper. That same day, I went into the attic. There's something about going through old things that slows down time. The dust, the boxes, the forgotten corners, they all speak in whispers. I found an envelope I didn't remember keeping. Inside was a photo of me, Henry, and our father, taken when I was no older than 20. We were standing in front of the first house we ever roofed together. No smiles, just sunburns, sweat, and a quiet kind of pride. On the back, Henry had written, "The roof only holds if the foundation's been loved." I sat there for a long time with that photo in my lap. Not crying, just breathing differently, slower, more deliberately, because I was starting to understand something I'd spent decades avoiding. Henry hadn't just left me his assets. He'd left me the responsibility of deciding what mattered now. And maybe, for the first time, I was ready to answer that question. The next day, I drove to the edge of town, to a part no one seemed to care about anymore. Old buildings stood like broken teeth, forgotten by the same hands that once built them. I parked in front of the old bakery, now boarded up and empty, except for the graffiti and pigeons. But I saw something different. I saw space. I saw a roof that needed fixing and walls that still had something to say. I saw a place where maybe, just maybe, I could build something that didn't need applause to matter. I called a friend from years ago, a contractor who owed me a favor or two. We met the following morning, and I asked what it would take to make the space safe again. He looked at me like I was crazy. "You want to rebuild this yourself?" he asked, laughing. "At your age?" I smiled, not offended. "You think I came this far just to stop climbing ladders?" By the end of the week, I'd signed the paperwork. The building was mine, and I had no grand plan, no name, no logo, no vision board. Just a quiet promise I made to myself. Whatever I build here, it'll be for people like me. People who were overlooked. People who knew how to fix things, but were never taught how to be seen. That weekend, my sons came over again. This time they brought folders. Charts. One of them had even printed out a proposal titled, "The Carter Legacy Project." I let them speak, let them lay out their big ideas, branding, partnerships, merchandise. They used words like monetize and equity, like they were casting spells. When they finished, they looked at me, waiting for a reaction. I simply said, "I bought a building." Their eyes lit up. They assumed it was an investment, a joint venture. One of them actually rubbed his hands together and said, "Brilliant, Dad. We can use it as the base for everything." I stood up, walked to the counter, poured myself a glass of water, then turned and said, "No, I bought it for something else, something quieter." Their faces shifted, confusion, then concern, then that subtle flicker of fear, the kind that comes when a plan starts to slip through your fingers. "What do you mean?" one asked. "I mean, I'm not building anything for profit or for legacy. I'm building something for people who never had a place to be useful. I'm calling it raízes." They didn't understand the word. I told them it meant roots in Portuguese, that sometimes, before we grow up, we need to go back down, dig deeper, find where we started, and decide if that place was ever safe enough to return to. They left shortly after that. No arguments, just silence, but not the kind that hurts. The kind that warns you. They're already planning their next move. I didn't tell anyone about the name, not even when they asked again what I was calling the project. They thought it was just a phase, some sentimental detour before I handed the keys over and let them do what they always do, polish something until it forgets where it came from. But I knew what I was doing. Or at least, I knew what I wasn't going to do. I wasn't going to let someone else decide the value of what was given to me. The building needed more than repair. It needed forgiveness. The roof sagged on the west side. The windows were either cracked or boarded shut, and the smell of rot still lingered near the baseboards. But I kept showing up, alone at first. I swept the floors, tore out the old counters, opened the windows, and let the light touch the places that hadn't seen it in years. There was something sacred about it, breathing life back into something everyone else had already written off. I didn't care if it was slow. I didn't care if it didn't impress anyone. I just cared that it was honest. One morning, while sorting through a box of Henry's old papers, I found something I hadn't seen before. Tucked behind a faded photo, one of us as kids, sitting cross-legged in front of our father's shed, was a sealed envelope. No stamp, no address, just my name, written in the kind of ink that fades with time, and a date, 4 months before his death. I stared at it for a while, not ready to open it. There's a certain weight to the things people write when they know they're running out of time. Words stop being decorative. They become deliberate. And I wasn't sure I was ready to be seeing that clearly. When I finally opened it, I had to read the first few lines twice just to believe they were real. "Carter, if you're holding this, then I'm already gone." And I didn't want to say all this while I was still alive because, well, I was always better at building walls than opening doors. You already know that. But I need you to hear a few things from me, now that I can't dodge the conversation. The letter wasn't long, but every word felt heavier than steel. You were never invisible to me. Not once. I saw you raise those boys when Martha passed. Watch from a distance while you patched together a life that no one ever stopped to admire. You kept showing up, for them, for everyone. And still, they treated you like background noise. That's the part that broke me, Carter. Watching them forget the one man who never once forgot them. I stopped reading. Let the paper rest on my lap. Let the tears come, slow and silent, the way all the big things in life arrive. Because for so long, I'd carried this quiet ache, this feeling that my life had happened in the shadows, that I'd given and given and still somehow come up short. And here was my brother, the one who had everything, telling me I had something he'd never been able to find. I kept reading. The money, the business, the house by the water, none of it ever mattered to me the way you think. They were just walls I built to feel in control. But you built something real. You were present. You were kind. You did the work no one clapped for. And somehow, you did it without bitterness. That's why I left it all to you. Not as a gift, as a correction, as a way to say, I saw you. I always did. I folded the letter slowly, set it back inside the envelope, and I didn't speak for the rest of the day. Some things don't need responses. They just need room to live inside you. After that, I changed the way I worked. Not faster, not bigger, just deeper. Every nail I hammered into the wall, I imagined Henry standing behind me, arms crossed, finally proud of the brother who never asked for much. I started leaving the door open while I worked, and soon people started walking in. At first, it was just curious neighbors, peeking in to see what the old man was doing with a dead building. But then came a teenager named Marcus, eyes tired, clothes dirty, asking if I needed help. I said yes, not because I couldn't do it myself, but because I wanted him to believe he could be useful. Then came Alejandra, a single mother who once worked in a bakery, offering to paint if I covered the daycare hours. Then 2 retired electricians, a young vet, a girl who wanted to learn how to lay tile, so she could fix her grandma's bathroom. It wasn't planned. It just happened. Ray Eyes started to grow, not in profits or projections, but in people who'd been dismissed, overlooked, left out of everything that mattered. And here, for the first time, they were part of something being built from scratch. My sons didn't understand it. They still called, still checked in, but less often now. I think they realized I wasn't going to hand them the keys to anything, and that whatever I was building, it didn't include them by default. Not because I didn't love them, but because I needed them to understand that legacy isn't something you inherit. It's something you earn. One night, I sat at the old bakery's front window, now cleaned and glowing with warm light, and watched the street outside. People passed by slowly, some stopping to smile, some waving as they recognized the new life behind the glass. I took out Henry's letter again, read the last line one more time. Don't let them tell you this world only belongs to the loud. The quiet ones hold it together. That line stayed with me for hours, because maybe for the first time in my life, I believed it too. I never meant for any of it to be public. Ray Eyes wasn't supposed to be a story. It was supposed to be a space, quiet, useful, real. A place for the kind of people who didn't fit into boardrooms or spreadsheets. We weren't chasing funding. We weren't pitching visions. We were sanding old floors and patching up memories, one wall at a time. But word has a way of traveling. And sometimes, the things that grow in silence end up echoing louder than anything shouted from a stage. It started with a local journalist. Her name was Beth. She showed up one afternoon while we were fixing the gutters. She had kind eyes and a notebook she barely used. Said she'd heard about the building, about the people coming and going, and wondered if there was a story behind it. I almost said no. I don't like cameras. I don't like being the center of anything. But then she asked something no one had asked me in a long time. What made you want to start this? And I didn't have a rehearsed answer. So I just told her the truth. That I'd been given something unexpected. That I used to fix roofs alone, and now I was trying to fix something deeper, with others. That maybe, if you give people a reason to show up, they'll surprise you with how much they're willing to carry. She stayed for an hour, asked gentle questions, listened more than she spoke, took a few pictures, me in my work shirt, standing next to Marcus, both of us covered in sawdust and sunlight. I didn't think much of it when she left. Figure it might be a blurb in the Sunday paper, something tucked between the weather and the crossword. But the next morning, her article was everywhere. Online, in print, on the local news. The headline read, "The man who inherited millions and built something money couldn't buy." I stared at the screen for a long time. There was my face, older and more tired than I remembered, and next to it, a picture of the bakery lit up like a home. The article told the whole story, about Henry, the will, the building, the volunteers. It wasn't dramatic, just honest. But somehow, that honesty struck a nerve. Comments poured in, emails, letters, people asking how they could help, if there were other places like this, if they could send tools, or time, or teenagers who needed something to believe in. I didn't know what to do with the attention. Part of me wanted to shut the door again, to let it fade. But the other part, maybe the part of me Henry saw before I did, understood that this wasn't about me anymore. It was about all of us who had ever been dismissed as too quiet, too simple, too soft for a world that values noise. In the days that followed, more people came. Not reporters, not investors, just people. A woman who used to be a nurse, now retired, asking if we had first aid kits. A young man who'd spent time in prison, looking for a place where his record wouldn't follow him through the door. A teacher on leave. A teenage girl who wanted to learn how to weld. We found space for everyone. Sometimes we built shelves just to give someone a task. Sometimes we just listened. And in the middle of it all, my son showed up again. This time, dressed nice. Smiles practiced. One of them had a leather folder. The other had business cards already printed with Carter and Sons, beneath a logo I'd never seen before. They brought me coffee, not the kind I drink, but the kind people use to impress, foam art and paper sleeves. Sat me down like it was a pitch meeting. They said we had an opportunity, that the article had opened a door, that now was the time to scale, to make Ray Eyes as a brand, a franchise. Imagine this in every city, Dad, with our name on it. I listened. I let them finish. Then I stood up, walked over to the window, and watched Marcus teach a boy how to measure wood without cutting corners. I watched Alejandra sweep the entryway with care, humming the same lullaby she sang to her daughter when she dropped her off each morning. I looked back at my sons and said, quietly but clearly, no. They didn't understand. They pushed again, said I was wasting potential, said I could turn this into a movement, that Henry would want it to grow. But they were wrong, because Henry didn't leave me this to make it bigger. He left it so I could finally make something whole. I thanked them for the coffee, handed them the folder, and said they were welcome to visit, but not to pitch, that this place had its own rhythm, and it didn't include titles or logos. They left, confused, maybe a little angry, but I didn't feel guilty. I just felt steady. That night, I sat on the front steps with Marcus. We watched the sun dip behind the neighboring rooftops. He asked me what I thought would happen next. I told him I didn't know, that I wasn't planning too far ahead, that for now, it was enough to see the lights on inside a place that used to be dark. And then I said something I hadn't realized I believed until it left my mouth. Maybe success isn't about building something that lasts forever. Maybe it's about building something that matters, even if it only lasts long enough to change one person. He nodded, and for a long while, we didn't say anything else. We didn't have to. It's strange how quickly people start watching you once they think you become someone. One day, I was just a man fixing up an old bakery with a few volunteers and too many memories. The next, I was being called a community leader in rooms I'd never stepped into, named in conversations where my name used to mean nothing. I didn't chase any of it, but the spotlight has a way of following people who never asked for it. A few weeks after the article came out, a man in a suit showed up, drove in with a black SUV that didn't belong on our street, windows tinted so dark I could see my reflection before I saw his face. He stepped out like he owned the place. Shoes too clean, smile too sharp. He said his name was Daniel, an advisor to someone important, someone who wanted to talk. He handed me a card. I didn't even read it. He said they'd been following the story, that what I was doing was inspiring, that it had potential for social impact. He spoke in words that sounded rehearsed, called Ray Eyes as a model worth scaling, said he had access to people who could help me maximize reach. Then he paused and smiled, like we were about to make history together. I told him I'd think about it, not because I was tempted, but because I'd learned that silence unsettles people more than resistance. He left me a folder filled with proposals, graphs, mock-ups, promised me a call from the mayor's office within the week. That night, I sat with the folder in my lap but didn't open it, just stared at it like it was a test I hadn't studied for. And maybe it was, because when someone offers to give you a platform, the real question isn't what they want to build with you. It's what they expect to take from you in return. The next morning, I went back to work. Marcus was already there, helping a kid hang drywall for the first time. Alejandra had brought muffins. There was music playing from a little speaker someone donated, something slow and soft that made the air feel warm. And I thought, why would I trade this for approval from people who've never held a hammer in their lives? So when the call came, I let go to voicemail. Then I tossed the folder into the recycling bin behind the building. Not out of anger, but out of clarity. Because now I knew exactly what I didn't want. I didn't want applause. I didn't want plaques. I didn't want to be a face on a campaign someone else could control. I wanted to keep showing up for people who needed space to be useful. That was enough. But the silence didn't last long. The next week, I got a letter from my son's lawyer. I recognized the name instantly. He'd handled some of Henry's business years ago. The envelope was thick, the kind that doesn't carry greetings. I opened it slowly. Inside was a formal notice. My sons were requesting a legal review of the will, challenging Henry's decision, claiming I had exerted undue influence, or that he wasn't of sound mind when he made me sole beneficiary. I didn't feel angry. I didn't even feel surprised, just tired, because what they didn't understand was that this was never about the money. Not for me, not for Henry. It was about dignity, about who gets a matter. And now, they were trying to erase that, not just from me, but from a man who finally saw me after a lifetime of being passed over. I called the lawyer, calmly explained I had no interest in fighting, that the will was solid, but I wasn't going to waste my days in a courtroom proving I was worthy of something I never asked for in the first place. He said he understood, said he'd take care of it. I hung up and went back to patching the window near the entrance, where the morning sun always hit just right. A few days later, they stopped calling, but I kept showing up. Ray Eyes kept growing, not as a business, not as a brand, just as a place where people found themselves again. We started hosting Sunday meals, nothing fancy, just a long table, folding chairs, and food brought by whoever could bring something. People came hungry for more than bread. They came for conversation, for presence, for the quiet comfort of being seen without being sold something. And then, one evening, something unexpected happened. A man in his early 30s walked through the door. His jacket was wrinkled. His shoes were worn. He looked exhausted in a way that wasn't just physical. He hesitated before stepping inside, like he wasn't sure he belonged. But then he saw me, and I saw the boy I'd raised, now older, quieter, and carrying something heavy he couldn't name. It was my youngest son. He didn't speak at first, just stood there. And I didn't push. I waited, let him find his own way to sit, to breathe, to ask whatever it was he'd come to ask. Finally, he said, "I lost everything." I nodded, not because I was glad, but because sometimes you have to lose what you thought mattered to see what really does. He told me his business had folded, that the investors backed out, the money dried up, and the people he'd trusted vanished. He'd burned bridges with clients and friends. And now, he had no job, no home, no one left to call. Except me. I didn't offer him comfort right away. I didn't offer a room or a plan. I simply asked, "Can you paint?" He looked confused. "What?" "There's a wall out back. It needs painting. Supplies are in the shed." And for the first time since he was a boy, he nodded without arguing. He painted until sunset. Didn't check his phone. Didn't complain. Just worked. That night, I handed him a plate of food and said, "You can stay, but not because you're my son, because you showed up." He nodded again. No words, just a quiet kind of thank you. And in that moment, I realized something Henry must have known all along. Sometimes the only way to rebuild a broken bond is with your hands full of work and your heart wide open. He didn't ask to stay forever. He didn't talk about the will or the lawsuit or the articles that once painted me as someone he hadn't believed I could be. He just showed up every morning, grabbed a paintbrush or a broom, and did whatever needed doing. We didn't talk much at first, but sometimes the quiet between two people says more than any apology ever could. In the first week, I noticed small things. He stopped checking his phone. He started eating slower, sitting longer at the table after meals, not rushing off like the world was waiting. He helped Alejandra fix the pantry shelves, sanded the old chairs without being asked, and every now and then, I'd catch him standing at the window, watching the others laugh or work, or simply exist without needing to prove anything. It was like he was learning to breathe again in a place where no one was measuring his worth in numbers or likes or quarterly growth. One afternoon, we were repairing a leaky pipe under the kitchen sink. He was on the floor, covered in dust, wrench in hand. I was holding the flashlight, trying not to let my knees crack too loudly. Out of nowhere, he said, "I used to think you had nothing." I didn't respond right away. Just let the water drip and the silence stretch between us. Then he added, softer this time, "But this place, it's more than anything I ever built." I nodded. "That's because we didn't build it for profit. We build it for people." He tightened the valve, and looked up. Why didn't you ever say that to us? Why didn't you tell us what mattered to you? I sat back on my heels and shrugged. Because I thought showing up was enough. I thought cooking dinner, keeping the lights on, fixing the roof, that it all said what I didn't know how to put into words. He wiped his hands on an old rag. I didn't see it. I know, I said. But you're seeing it now. That's what matters. That evening, he stayed late to help clean up after a community dinner. When most people had gone home, he walked over and handed me a small notebook. It was filled with sketches, layouts, ideas, things we could build in the empty rooms upstairs. I'm not trying to take over, he said quickly. I want to be useful. And for the first time, I didn't see a boy trying to impress. I saw a man learning how to belong. The next morning, I found him out back, fixing the fence. No one asked him to. He just saw a board loose and decided it mattered enough to stay whole. That's when I realized something that took me years to understand. Sometimes, the real apology isn't a sentence. It's consistency. It's being there, even when the cameras are gone and the crowd has moved on. It's choosing to stay when there's nothing to gain. Later that week, my older son called. He hadn't spoken to me since the letter from the lawyer. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to pick up. Hey, he said, voice stiff, like he was chewing on pride. I heard he's staying with you. He is, I said. A pause. Then, are you letting him back in? I leaned against the door frame, watching Marcus teach a kid how to install a door hinge. He let himself back in, I said, but not with words. With work. There was silence on the other end, the kind that doesn't come from bad signal, but from something breaking open inside a person. Then he said, I'm not ready yet. And I replied, that's okay. The door's not locked, just not automatic. He didn't call back. Not yet, but I think he will. That night, I sat with my son, my younger one, on the front steps. We watched the street again, the same way Henry and I used to when we were boys pretending to be men. He asked if I thought his brother would ever come around. I told him maybe, that people move at different speeds. Some build bridges. Some need to watch the water for a while before they cross. Then I asked him a question I hadn't asked since he was 12. What do you want your life to look like? He thought about it. Really thought. Then said, I want to build something that matters. Something I'm not ashamed to leave behind. I smiled. Not because it was a good answer, but because it wasn't about me. It wasn't about approval or redemption. It was about him finally seeing the world in a way that wasn't shaped by image, but by impact. We stayed out there for a long time. Just two men. No titles. No roles. Just father and son, sharing space without needing to fill it. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something to heal. I felt like something already had. There's something sacred about a table. Not the kind with polished wood and matching chairs, but the kind that holds mismatched plates and stories passed between bites. Growing up, my family didn't have much, but when we sat around the table, it felt like the world stopped just long enough to make room for all of us. After Martha died, that stopped. The table stayed, but the chairs emptied. The boys grew quieter. Meals became schedules. Conversations turned into, how was your day? And what time is your shift? Until even those faded into silence. I kept setting places, hoping someone would sit. Eventually, I stopped. But a few months after Ray Eyes opened, I found myself thinking about tables again. Not just for meals, but for moments. For community. For healing. So I started building one. Nothing fancy. Just old pine boards, sanded smooth and sealed by hand. 10 feet long. Enough to make people squeeze in. Enough that elbows might bump, and someone would have to pass the salt. That's where the best stories live. In shared space. When it was finished, we put in the main room. No sign. No invitation. Just a table and a few folding chairs. But somehow people knew. They started showing up with Tupperware, bags of rice, fresh bread, still warm from someone's oven. No one asked who was in charge. No one asked who paid for what. They just came. And for the first time in years, I saw people linger. Not because they had nowhere else to be, but because something inside them whispered, stay a little longer. Alejandra made soup every Sunday. Marcus brought juice boxes, said it reminded him of school lunches when he actually had them. A man named Terrence, who barely spoke in the first 2 months, started bringing jazz CDs and playing them low during meals. I'd sit at the head, sometimes talking, sometimes just listening. And it hit me one afternoon, somewhere between the cornbread and the laughter, This was the table I'd been waiting for my whole life. It just didn't look the way I thought it would. Then, one Sunday, I left the seat at the other end of the table empty. Not because we ran out of chairs, but because I wanted to leave a space for Henry. I don't know what he would have said if he'd walked through those doors. Maybe he would have shaken his head, asked why I hadn't hired a caterer or cleaned up the wiring. But maybe he would have sat down, passed the bread, and realized what I now understood. That some legacies aren't built in square footage or net worth. They're built in moments, in the people who carry them forward without ever needing to say your name. After the meal, as people trickled out and the last bowl was scraped clean, my son came up beside me. The younger one, still living with me, still painting, still showing up. He tapped the empty chair. That for Uncle Henry. I nodded. He'd be proud. I looked at him. Of me. He paused, thoughtful. Of this. That night, we stayed late cleaning up. Music still playing, just low enough to make the silence feel warm. When we finished, I stood in the center of the room and looked around. At the table, the cracked walls we still hadn't fixed, the hand-painted signs, the chalkboard where someone had written, "You are needed here." It wasn't perfect, but it was alive. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't been able to put into words until then. I wasn't trying to build something lasting. I was trying to build something true. Later, back home, I pulled out the photo of me and Henry again, the one from our teenage years, barefoot and sunburnt, tools in hand. And I noticed something I hadn't before. In the background, on the edge of the frame, was our father's old table. The same table we used to eat at when there was more air than food. The same table where Henry first sketched plans for a shop he never thought he'd build. And for the first time, I saw it clearly. We'd always been building tables, just didn't know it yet. The next day, I asked Marcus and my son to help me build a few more. Nothing elaborate, just enough for a room upstairs we were turning into a study space. We sanded wood in silence, the kind of silence that feels full instead of empty. When we finished the first one, I ran my hand across the grain and smiled. We build so people have a place to sit, I said, even when they think they don't deserve one. Marcus nodded. Sometimes that's all someone needs. A seat. And I couldn't help but think how many people I'd known, my sons included, who spent their whole lives trying to earn space that should have been offered freely. How many times I'd done the same. But now, we were doing something different. No gates, no tests, just tables. That evening, we hosted another meal. More people came than usual. Someone brought a guitar. Someone else read a poem they'd written but never shared. There was cake, laughter, a spilled drink that no one got mad about. I looked around and thought, this is it. This is the inheritance I want to leave behind. Not buildings, not bank accounts, but a table that always has one more seat. The sun was still low when I climbed the ladder that morning. The metal was cool in my hands, familiar in a way nothing else in life had been. I hadn't been up on a roof in months, not since the work inside Ray Ises had taken over, but something in me needed to go back up, not to fix anything, just to look, to breathe from a little higher, to remember. The shingles held firm under my boots. I moved slow like I always have, not because I was afraid, but because some things deserve your full attention. I stood near the edge, looked out over the street, the buildings, the power lines stretching like veins across the sky. Below me, the bakery buzzed quietly. Alejandra unlocking the door, Marcus setting out chairs, my son sweeping the sidewalk before anyone else arrived. It was all still so simple, and somehow more than enough. Up there, I let my thoughts drift. Not to regrets. I'd had my fill of those, but to moments. The ones I didn't know were important until years later. Like the time Martha danced with the boys in the kitchen, twirling them one by one to a song on the radio they'd never admit they liked. Or the way Henry used to tap the table 3 times before standing up, as if grounding himself before entering the noise again. Or how, when I was 10, I fell off a shed roof and Dad didn't yell. He just carried me inside, made hot cocoa, and said, "Next time, tell me where you're going." I think we spent a lot of time chasing milestones, but it's the ordinary things that build us. The quiet loyalty, the unspoken care, the roofs that never leak because someone, somewhere, climbed up when no one else was looking. As I sat on the ridge, legs dangling over the side, I pulled a folded paper from my jacket. I'd written it the night before. Not a speech. Not a letter, just a few lines I didn't want to leave unsaid. To whoever finds this, I wasn't the loudest. I wasn't the richest. I didn't wear suits or run companies or know how to give grand speeches. But I showed up. I paid attention. I fixed what I could. I forgave what I couldn't. And if this place still stands, it's because a few people believed quiet hands could still hold the weight of something real. I folded it again and tucked it into the small metal box I'd bolted to the chimney. Just a habit, I guess. A way to leave a whisper behind in a world full of shouting. Climbing down, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not pride, exactly, and not peace. It was softer than that. A kind of stillness. Like I had finally made my way back to something I didn't know I'd lost. That evening, we didn't plan a meal, but people came anyway. They always do now. They bring what they can, food, time, silence. Some come to talk. Some just to sit. No one's in charge. No one keeps score. And that, more than anything, is what makes it work. After dinner, I walked out back and saw my older son standing by the garden boxes. He hadn't said he was coming. Just showed up. No folder. No pitch. No carefully rehearsed words. Just him, holding a small bag of seeds. Said on the package they grow fast, he said, offering them to me. I took the bag. Lettuce. Something easy. Something new. We planted side by side in silence. And somewhere between the soil and the moonlight, I realized I didn't need an apology. I just needed this. Later, as people packed up and the lights dimmed, I stood in the doorway watching them go. I thought about legacy again. Not the kind that gets written down or carved into stone, but the kind that breathes. That shows up on time. That remembers birthdays and fixes squeaky doors and teaches a stranger how to hammer a nail straight. I thought about Henry, about Dad, about Martha, and I thought about the boy I used to be, the one who just wanted to be seen not for what he could give, but for who he tried to be. Ray Eyes won't last forever. Buildings don't. People don't. But if one person leaves here a little more whole, a little more steady, then that's enough for me. Because I was never trying to change the world. I was just trying to hold one roof up long enough for someone else to find shelter underneath it.